Well, it is a joy to be with you on this Wednesday night of our gospel meeting. I don't know exactly how to verbalize it, but there's just something about Wednesday nights during the meeting that I especially enjoy. As a rule, it's the home people. And we appreciate visitors that are here tonight, and we've had a lot of visitors at the other services, but I do enjoy a Wednesday night service, and glad you're here tonight as we look at 7 things that a loving God hates. I appreciate Lionel leading the singing tonight. He mentioned his father, Brother Leo Plyler, and that just, it's kind of like turning a kaleidoscope when you start thinking about back and all the memories that we have. But I remember just being a youngster, no more than 11, 12 years old, attending up at Sayre in Jefferson County, and Brother Leo Plyler would, on a regular basis, it seemed like it was kind of an annual thing looking back, but I know more than once he would do this. He would come and teach singing, and he was so good at that. But as a youngster, he took a special interest in me. Just worked out. My parents were unable in different reasons. Sometimes I needed to ride to services. And I remember one time somebody had taken me over there and he wanted to take me back home. He said, I'd like to go in and meet your dad. My dad was having some health problems, and you just remember things like that. And over the years, he was such a good friend to me, and I miss folks like that. And Lionel has led singing for us a number of times in the past at Hanceville, as well as at different times that I've done gospel meetings. I remember up at Hartsville and Cold Springs, just to mention a couple. That one at Cold Springs, the acoustics in that building were good. The acoustics in this building, I think, are good for singing. But in the Cold Springs building, I remember that it just seemed especially good. And when I got up to preach, I expressed concern that we might be raising the roof with our singing. And Seth, most of you know our son Seth that preaches and works with the Northwood congregation. At that time he was little. And after services he said, Dad, I think I did see the roof coming up a couple of inches there. So it was good. And I appreciate when somebody said earlier he'd be leading singing tonight. I was glad to hear that. Good to be with you. Linda and I are just enjoying this week so much. It's just so good to be with the Browns. And these are people I hold in the highest regard for their work's sake and for the commonality of our God and the truth that we have. We have the most important things in this life and for eternity in common, and that's very special. Blessed be the tie that binds. I'm just delighted to be here. We're talking about 7 things that a loving God hates. In the world in which we live, just to talk about God hating something might kind of sound jarring. You know, how can a loving God hate things? Because, well, the Apostle John, in 1 John, the 4th chapter, in verse 16, he said, God is love. God is love. And in John 3:16, perhaps, if not the most well-known passage, certainly one of the most well-known passages in the New Testament, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. His love is so great, it's so vast, it's immeasurable. And we try to express that sometimes in songs. For example, could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry. Nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. How great the love of God is. And yet there are 6 things that are an abomination to him. 6 things that the Lord hates, yea, 7 that are an abomination to him. The proverb writer says, Solomon says in Proverbs chapter 6, and we'll be looking at that momentarily. And I was at our dinner this evening. We were with Leah and Hannah and Nathan. And I was telling them tonight we're going to be talking about the Proverbs. And boys and girls, if you want to know, are you listening, boys and girls, young people? If you want to know what the wisest man on earth said to young people, read the Proverbs. Because that's what the book of Proverbs is about. The thrust of it is wisdom, but especially for young people. We'll be looking primarily at the Proverbs tonight. But there are things that God hates, and we want to talk about those tonight. There are things that Jesus hates. We've recently, in fact, just this month, we've been looking at the letters to the 7 churches. And for example, when Jesus is dealing with the church at Ephesus, even though he tells them because they've left their first love, that if they don't repent, he's going to move the candlestick. But the point is, he's encouraging them to make that right. But one thing that he says is that it's encouraging. He says in verse 6 of Revelation 2, "But this you have, that you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate." Not only are there things that God hates, there are things that Jesus hates. And he uses that terminology again when he's writing to the church at Pergamum. In the 2nd chapter still, at verse 15, Jesus says, "Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate." Jesus says there's a doctrine in your church and I hate it. I hate the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. We don't know that much about, what was that, except, birds of a feather flock together. And you can tell a lot about a word by the company it keeps. And so you're talking about the doctrine of Balaam, and we know what that was, the doctrine of compromise and idolatry and immorality. And he'll say there are those in like manner that hold the teaching of the Nicolaitans. So apparently it's a doctrine of compromise, but the point is it's false doctrine. And we see from the twice stated references there that I just cited that Jesus hates false doctrine. Now I know that that's jarring to the ears of this postmodern world. But there are things that God hates. There are things that Jesus hates. And here's the thing about it. If we're imitators of God, if we're followers of Jesus, and we can read in His Word that God hates something, then we need to say, me too. We need to hate what God hates. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9 and verse 10. But Proverbs 8:13 says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. Ecclesiastes 3 says there's a time to hate. Paul in Romans chapter 12 and verse 9 says, abhor what is evil and cleave to what is good. And so that's what we want to talk about this evening. Those things that the Bible says God hates, these are an abomination to Him. If something is an abomination, that means you hold it in contempt. That means that this thing is loathsome. It's distasteful. You don't want to have anything to do with that. Get it out of my sight. It's an abomination. And so let's read the text together. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 6. In Proverbs 6 and verse 16, these 6 things the Lord hates. Yea, 7 are an abomination to Him. Now I'm reading from the New King James. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and last in verse 19 he says, and one who sows discord among brethren. Now these are things that God hates. These things are an abomination to Him. And as I say, we need, if we're to be like God, we need to hate what He hates. I'll tell you, the problem is, and Paul addressed this in Romans chapter 12 when he says, don't be conformed to the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. There's always pressure. Some of you ladies it could be whatever. But if you're making a cake, you've got all the ingredients in liquid form. And, I'm talking about some kinds of cakes. There are different kinds. But you have a pan, you pour the ingredients into in a liquid form, you put it in the oven at such and such a temperature for so long, and when it comes out, hopefully it's not sticking to the side of the pan anywhere, and you can turn it over, and here it is, take that off, and here's this beautiful, delicious cake, but it's in the shape of that container. It's taken that shape. It's been molded to that. And see, we're under constant pressure from the world to be pressed into the mold of the world. And it's just a constant battle. so that we have to work so that we're not desensitized, that we do truly have a sense of outrage at sin. We need to have a holy horror, a holy hatred for sin, not for people, but for sin. And again, that's the thing that is so often missing, not only in the world generally, but if we're not careful, among the people of God. Let's take a look, though. Let's take a look at these things that God hates. The first thing that is mentioned, and when I say the first thing, I'm just looking at the list in order. I don't know that there's rank order, like this is most important or this is worse. I'm not looking at it that way, but we're just taking it in order. And so the first one listed is the proud look. Now, I think it's the New American Standard that says haughty eyes. I know the Christian Standard Bible says arrogant eyes. But we know what that means. Arrogance, pride, being haughty. And the text says God hates that. He hates the proud look. Could I look at, I said we're going to look at some of the Proverbs. You'll get to use your Bible tonight. Just turn with me. And we'll look at Proverbs 8. I've already mentioned verse 13, the first part of it. Proverbs 8:13 says, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. But then he continues, pride and arrogance and the evil way and the perverse mouth I hate. The writer says, I hate pride, and it's in the context of the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. I want to read just a few other verses, not all of them, but just a few in the Proverbs, really without the need for comment. But in Proverbs 11 and verse 2, when pride comes, then comes shame, but with the humble is wisdom. In chapter 13 and the 10th verse, by pride comes only contention, but with the well-advised is wisdom. In chapter 14, we're just taking these in order. In chapter 14 and in verse 3, in the mouth of a fool is a rod of pride, but the lips of the wise will preserve them. In chapter 16 and verse 5, everyone who is proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Though they join forces, none will go unpunished. In the same chapter, drop down to verse 18. And this might be one of the better known passages about pride, but it says, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. And so there are other passages. I just wanted to read those, but it's just text after text like that in this wisdom literature that, again, is especially appealing to the hearts of young people. Now, I know that the English language is a dynamic language. It's not a dead language. And what that means is that it continues, new words continue to be created, and words that are old words can be used in modern ways that are not the intention of its earlier usage. And the word pride, sometimes people use that word and they're not referring to arrogance or being haughty. They might say, for example, of somebody that has a good work ethic, just say he takes pride in his work. They're not saying he's haughty or he's arrogant. They're just saying the boss doesn't have to be standing over him. He can be somewhere else. He has a job to do, and he has integrity about him and a work ethic. He takes pride in his work. And there might be any number of times that in modern usage that kind of statement is made, and it's in a good connotation. But I've taken the time, using the King James translation, to go through, and there's a lot of them, to go through every passage in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, and I will tell you there's not a single time that the word pride is ever used in a good sense. It defiles. Did you know that? Jesus in Mark chapter 7, when he's talking about what's real defilement and it's not eating with ceremonially unclean hands, and he talks about the things that come from within the man, and one of the things he mentions specifically in Mark 7 verse 22 is pride, and he says all these evil things come from within, from the heart of man, and they defile the man. And that's the consistent usage in both the Old and New Testament of the biblical concept of pride. And I say that because I know some of the modern translations and some passages will reflect a modern usage of it. But the word here as is used, the word translated in these verses, it's never used like that in a good sense. It's something that God hates. And so I mean, what do we have? Paul would ask the Corinthians, what do you have that you've not received? If you have some talent, if you have some ability, who gave you that? Every good and every perfect gift comes down from the Father of lights, in whom there is neither variation nor shadow that is cast by turning, James says in James 1, verse 17 and 18. Everything we have comes from him. And if we have ability, then to God be the glory. Use it, and Peter will say this in 1 Peter chapter 2. For example, in the passage perhaps well known, if anyone speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. And you think, well, he's saying give book, chapter, and verse for it. Well, that's true, but you keep reading, and he's listing if you can do this or if you can do that, but he's saying do it to the glory of God, whatever God's gifts are to you. And there's just no place for haughtiness. You have a little more money than somebody else. You've been blessed in this world's goods perhaps than others. That's no reason to look down on somebody else. Everyone is created in the image of God, and every soul is precious to God. There's just no room for pride. God hates that. And you know, when I teach the prophets, one of the points I make about that is that you got three major points in the prophets. And you got a lot of prophets and a lot of chapters, but three major points. It's a message to the people of their day, God's people of their day. Secondly, God is the God of the nations. And many chapters are devoted to the various nations. And then the third and most important are the messianic prophecies. But in regard to point number 2, when God is addressing the nations of the world, the thing that keeps surfacing that he's holding them accountable for, you see, all people are amenable to God. Everyone is accountable to God. But for example, in Ecclesiastes 28, he's talking to the king of Tyre. And this is an oracle against Tyre that they're going, I'm going to bring you down. But they've so exalted themselves as if they're God. But he said, you're not God. And the same way in Isaiah chapter 14 is referring to the king of Babylon. And the king in Babylon, the king kind of represents the kingdom in this case. But Babylon's going to fall. But the thing God specifies is because of their pride. You keep reading the prophets and you read his oracles to the nations and you find out God hates pride. He doesn't like it in his people. He held the nations of men accountable. You remember Nebuchadnezzar when he exalted himself and said, you know, is this not great Babylon which I have built? And remember what happened to him in Daniel chapter 4, how he was humbled. Till he knew, until he acknowledged that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. Daniel 4 verse 17. And the text goes on to say, setting up over it the lowest of men. And we need to understand that part of the passage. Sometimes God can use somebody that does not have a high ethical standard, or whatever's involved when he says even the lowest of men. God can put someone like that in that position for his glory. For example, in Exodus chapter 12, he told Pharaoh, for this reason, I put you in power, that my glory might be seen. And you think about it, if somebody else beside Pontius Pilate had been where he was, he might have done the right thing and not allowed Jesus to be crucified. But it was essential that Jesus be crucified, so the right man was in a position of authority that God knew would let that happen. But I'm just saying, pride. God hates pride. And we need to just, 1 Corinthians 13 verse 4, love does not vaunt itself. And so there's just no place for pride. One of the sins of the Gentile world that Paul discusses in Romans 1 and verse 22 is esteeming themselves to be wise. They became fools. So there's more to come. But I just want to emphasize, because the Bible does, that God hates pride. And so we want to be careful that we humble ourselves before God, as we should, and clothe ourselves with humility. Because God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble, 1 Peter 5 and verse 6. Well, let's go on. Let's see what else God hates, that we need to hate, and not want it in ourselves, and not fellowship that or give countenance to it in anyone else. So that has to be our attitude. You know, Ephesians the 5th chapter says, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather even reprove them. So not only you don't do it, but don't have fellowship with unfruitful works of darkness. Number 2, though, is a lying tongue. And I'd like, if I may, just to do the sort of thing I did with pride and just go back to the Proverbs. And I can't read all just for the sake of time. There's so many of them. But I just want to read a few of the other verses that build on this, that God hates a lying tongue. Let's look at Proverbs 10 and verse 18. Whoever hides hatred has lying lips, and whoever spreads slander is a fool. In chapter 12 and verse 19. The truthful lip shall be established forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment. In this same chapter, verse 22. Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but those who deal truthfully are his delight. In 13 and verse 5, look at this. A righteous man hates lying, but a wicked man is loathsome and comes to shame. Why does a righteous man hate lying? Because he's wanting to be a partaker of the divine nature. Because he's wanting to be an imitator of God and walk as beloved children, Ephesians 5, verse 1. And so God hates a lying tongue. A righteous man hates lying. And chapter 21 and verse 6. I'll take just one more. I've got more written down. But in 21 and verse 6, not 26, 21 and verse 6. Getting treasures by a lying tongue is the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. In other words, trying to gain financially, and you misrepresent a product, or in otherwise you're dishonest in your dealings, trying to get gain with a lying tongue. Again, this look at the connotation, the fleeting fantasy of those who seek death. That's what it's associated with here in the Proverbs. God hates a lying tongue. A lying tongue is a deceitful tongue. It comes from a dishonest heart. And in Ephesians, the 4th chapter, we're told to not lie to one another, but speak the truth one to another. There's no place in our lives for dishonesty and for lying. God hates that. You know, sometimes people lie for different reasons. They lie to take advantage of others. Some lie to cover their sins. Some lie to protect themselves from another's anger. And sometimes people think they're being nice. I was doing some good reading today. It's an autobiography of Mark Twain. Now, before you get alarmed, I just read one chapter, and I'm a fast reader, so it didn't take me a long time. But this was a chapter in which Mark Twain is talking about Booker T. Washington. He really admired Mr. Washington, and he tried to promote him, and he says a lot of good things about him. But anyway, there was a speech. And there were thousands of people that came in and more thousands that could not come in to hear Booker T. Washington, but they were also there because Mark Twain was there. And so after everything's over and people are still there, here's what Mr. Twain said. When the affair was over and the people began to climb up on the stage and pass along and shake hands, the usual thing happened. It always happens. I shake hands with people who used to know my mother intimately in Arkansas, in New Jersey, in California, in Jericho. And I have to seem so glad and so happy to meet these persons who knew in this intimate way one who was so near and dear to me. And this is the kind of thing that gradually turns a person into a polite liar and deceiver, for my mother was never in any of those places. But he's saying, to be nice, it's like, well, really? How about that? Well, I'll tell her you said hi. And so you end up doing, so sometimes it seems harmless, but I'll tell you there's no such thing as a sugar-coated lie. There's no such thing as a white lie, as a lie that's harmless. And here again, that what we say, Jesus said in Luke 6:46, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Or, that's not the right verse, is it, Wes? Where is that verse found? Anyway, Jesus said that. But Luke 6:46 is another one. It's a good verse, but as soon as I said that, I realized that's not where that one's found. Just when I needed him the most. See what happens? Lying lips. Pardon me? Somebody say.
The pressure's on.
Oh, yeah. 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 That's bothering me. Is that in Matthew chapter 12? That's just bothering me a little bit since we're among friends.
Luke 6:45.
Yeah, I said 46. Look how close I was. Close, but yet so far. Okay, verse 45. And verse 46, why call you me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? And I realized that as soon as I said it. But I never want to give the wrong reference. I'm not trying to distract. It's just I'd rather correct it and then go on. I feel like I'm among friends anyway. But I'll tell you what, if you're in a tight, don't call on Wes. I'm just kidding, Wes. Sort of. Lying. You never know what a kid is going to remember. I told you about some childhood memories a while ago. Another one, we had some relatives that lived up north, and they couldn't help that. I mean, they were Yankees, but they couldn't help it. You know what I mean? And so they were visiting with us, and it's just, I'm sure I never said anything about this to my dad one way or the other, but I just happened to be overhearing a grown-up conversation, and my dad told my aunt, who was from up north, he said, the Bible says that all liars will have their part in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. She said, I didn't know that. She said, does the Bible really say that? And he said, yes. And he was able to find the passage, and it's in Revelation 21 and verse 8, and turn to that, and it says, but the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And that's not the only time that lying is mentioned. In verse 27, there shall by no means enter into anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. In fact, it says it again in chapter 22 and verse 15. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters. And then he says, whoever loves and practices a lie. See, some people not only lie to get out of a tight spot, some people love to lie. And that's what this passage is talking about. They'd prefer a lie to the truth. And whoever loves and practices a lie. So really 3 times in the last 2 chapters in the Bible, that kind of thing is specified. God hates that. And it puts me in mind of those that are under consideration, the teachers involved in 1 Timothy chapter 4, when the Apostle Paul says that the Spirit says expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared as with a hot iron. Now, this is not saying that every false teacher knows better. I think there's some people that are honestly mistaken. But the ones he's talking about here know better. Here he's talking about those that speak lies in hypocrisy and have reached the point that their conscience is seared as with a hot iron, chapter 4 and verse 2. And you know what? If you've not read this passage, you might be wondering, well, what in the world could be in the category of doctrines of demons and such a lie that is told? Look at what he says in the next verse, because he gives some examples. He says, forbidding to marry and commanding to abstain from foods. You mean it's that bad? Yes. Yes. He says these are doctrines of demons. It doesn't come from the Lord. He says that these are lies spoken in hypocrisy. The idea that a celibate state is preferable to marriage, it was God that said, it is not good that man should be alone. And when you have, a person may choose not to marry, that's a different matter, but this talks about forbidding to marry. And when you have religious societies and groups that forbid certain ones to marry, it's in direct violation of Scripture. And when foods are forbidden to be eaten, or celibacy, or I should say, not celibacy, that's in regard to the marriage, but asceticism is what I'm trying to say in regard to abstaining from food or certain foods, fish on Friday is all, or whatever. this is the kind of thing he's talking about. And see, we're so used to, well, like if you go up to Hansville, you can see the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. And that's listed as one of the top tourist attractions for the state of Alabama. And so, you hear people talking, I just love to go there. It makes me feel so peaceable and it's just so wonderful. And so we're so used to that being done and a person to choose to be in that and that kind of teaching being done that we don't think that much about it. That's why we need to get back to passages such as this. Number 3, God hates hands that shed innocent blood. Now, let me just say this in the beginning, that there's a difference between innocent blood and guilty blood. God hates the hands that shed innocent blood. Now, for example, when I say guilty blood, one who has committed a capital crime. For example, in Genesis chapter 9, the point is made in verse 6, that whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, because he was created in the image of God. In fact, the wording in Numbers 35 is very strong. It says this. It says, no expiation can be made for the blood of him that was shed except the blood of him that shed it. You can't pay a fine. You can't go to prison. No expiation for the shedding of blood except the blood of him that shed it. That's true in the patriarchal dispensation of Genesis 9, the Mosaic dispensation of Numbers 35 and other passages, several instances in Exodus 21, and it's true in the Christian dispensation. In Romans 13 and verse 4, speaking of the powers that be, the government bears not the sword in vain. The sword was the instrument of execution for criminals. And to say he bears it not in vain is a negative way of stating the positive truth that he does bear it with God's authority for a purpose. And so we don't need to be confused about that. Clearly, in all 3 dispensations, God has taught, he's authorized, and for certain crimes has required the use of capital punishment. But that's not what this is talking about. It's not talking about guilty blood. This says God hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood. In the book of Proverbs, in the 1st chapter, the thing that Solomon is warning about is, and this is played out time and time again, where it starts out in Proverbs 1 and verse 10. He says, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol and whole like those down into a pit. We'll find all kinds of possessions. We shall fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. And no wonder he says, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. But prison is full of people that did not start out to steal or to kill, but they wanted acceptance. And somebody said, well, here, come along and go with us, and we'll be in this together, and we'll all share things. We'll have one purse. And he says in verse, they lie in wait their feet run to evil, verse 16. They make haste to shed blood. And I remember a brother on death row that told about his experience of running with that wrong crowd and choosing to do that, but then taking part in what turned out to be a murder. And for that reason, he ultimately was put to death for that. And he wrote about that, warning others not to go down that path. God hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood. But a lot of times, it may not be somebody robbing and stealing. Sometimes it might be in an abortion clinic. I want to tell you, I don't know of any blood that could possibly be more innocent than that of an unborn baby. That has never, ever hurt anybody, and should have the protection not only of the mother and father, but of everybody else. And yet there are people, they demand their right to have abortion rights. What's God's attitude toward that? What is abortion? It's terminating the life of that unborn baby, which again, depending on what time and the way things have been done. Sometimes that has been, it's been so awful as to include right up to the point of birth. I mean, it's wrong at any point. But God hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood. And the devil has many devices, 2 Corinthians 2, verse 11. And he uses euphemisms a lot. After all, you want to be pro-choice, don't you? I mean, even the terms pro-choice and anti-abortion are themselves prejudicial. I mean, who wants to be against something all the time? These are anti-abortion, but these are pro-choice, and choice is a good thing. God hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood. And God will hold accountable those that do so. And you need to hate it too. That's not a political statement. But I will tell you this. If somebody's running for office, and I'm not talking about which party, if he's an independent or a Republican or a Democrat, would not matter. But if he's running or she is running for office and on their platform and what they're promoting is abortion, I'm not going to cast my vote for it. It may be that in that election I just won't vote at all. But I sure won't vote for someone that is advocating the shedding of innocent blood. God hates that. And we need to hate it too. I remember a lady that I thought a lot of, and I still do. This was years ago, but a conversation, the subject of abortion came up, and she said, well, I would never have an abortion. She's a Christian. She said, I would never do that. But she said, I think others should have that right to do that if they want to. Well, see what is lacking there? There's the personal, I wouldn't do that. But that's not good enough. That's not taking it far enough. You've got to hate the hands of those that shed innocent blood. And really, if you logically thought that through, if abortion is killing the unborn baby, which it is, would you really say, I think someone has the right to kill an unborn baby? And so that's, again, where that world creeps in and well, I may not do that, but somebody, live and let live. No, God hates the hands of those who shed innocent blood, and he hates a heart that devises wicked plans. Now, the thing about, you have some cats that might be pretty smart, and dogs, and animals can be trained, but man is the only being that's created in the image of God. And we truly have freedom of choice. And see, God looks at our heart. And here's the heart that devises wicked things. God has given us intellect. He's given us a heart that we can compute, we can calculate, we can work, we can plan. But here's one using his heart to devise wicked plans. And then he can't wait till he can execute those plans. The heart is so important. Proverbs 4:23. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 27:3. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Jesus said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. The heart is so important. And we need to preserve its purity, and we never need to use it to devise wicked plans. Some people make their living by devising wicked plans. Drug dealers devise wicked plans. Liquor sellers devise wicked plans. Pornographers have wicked plans. And God hates the heart that devises wicked plans. Just how to carry out this scheme, the plan, the creative calculations to do what? To do wrong. That's a misuse of the freedom of choice that God gives us, and he'll hold us accountable for that. Number 5, God hates feet that are swift in running to evil. Most of the time in the biblical world, the way you got somewhere was by walking. Sometimes somebody might have a donkey or a horse, but that was not the norm. Most people got where they were going by walking. That was their transportation. And so you see that a lot in the scriptures reflected. And here, feet that are swift in running, but instead of using it for good things, swift in running to evil. And so here's rashness, here's eagerness, here's readiness to do what? Well, I'm afraid of losing time. Got to get busy here. And impatient of any delay feet that are swift in running to evil. I did want to look with you at one passage in Isaiah chapter 59. In Isaiah chapter 59, and we'll read verse 7 and 8. Their feet run to evil. They make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. Wasting and destruction are in their path. The way of peace they've not known. There's no justice in their ways. They have made themselves crooked paths. Whoever takes that way shall not know peace. You know, the Bible teaches, there is no peace, saith my God, for the wicked. And something that's so precious is having the peace of God that passes all understanding, but the way of peace they've not known it. He says they're not going to know it as long as they have feet that are making haste to do evil, and wasting and destruction are in their path. Do you notice how Solomon is using the various parts of the body, the whole person? Eyes, haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises evil, and feet that are swift in running to evil. So all the members of the body that can be employed, like Romans 6 would say to use our members as instruments of righteousness and not as instruments of sin. But Solomon is here skillfully just taking the various parts of the body and showing how that they can be used to sin and used in evil ways. Number 6, he says, a false witness who utters lies. Now, he's not forgotten, he's already said God hates a lying tongue. But when he says a false witness, that would include, for example, I don't mean it would be limited to that, but this is somebody that is intentionally lying to assist in perverting justice. A false witness who utters lies. I'll tell you the thing that comes to my mind. You know, when Naboth would not sell, and it was for scriptural reasons, he would not sell his inheritance or trade his inheritance to King Ahab. And Ahab understood that. He didn't like it, but he accepted that. And Jezebel said, "Are you not the king? I'll get that for you." And so she got a hold of some base men and asked them to call an assembly, call a fast, and to give false testimony that Naboth has uttered blasphemy against God and the king. Those men did that, and he was taken out and stoned to death. See, that was and of course there are consequences of that, but our purpose now is just to illustrate that biblically, that this is a false witness who uttered lies. And God hates that. When you think in terms of just reading this morning in the Gospel of Mark, some of the reading there in regard to Jesus' trials and crucifixion, and they suborned false witnesses, and yet they were frustrated because they could not get the two to agree. You know, you had to have it confirmed at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And so finally, what you remember what happened is when the high priest directly asked Jesus, "Are you the Son of God? Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" And when he said yes, when he answered that, well, we don't need witnesses anymore. He's spoken blasphemy. What do you think? And so he's guilty. But false witnesses were used at the trial of Jesus. God hates false witnesses who utter lies. I thought in terms of the wording in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 19, when Paul is telling Timothy as an evangelist, against an elder, receive not an accusation, except at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. You know, the work of an elder is important. They watch for your souls. And the idea of somebody just making a careless, unfounded accusation, and so all the resources are pulled in, let's run this down, and then, oh, well, that really wasn't what was said anyway. Oh, well, that's what I heard, but I'm sorry about that, nothing to it, you know. And so he's saying, don't do that. It's a serious matter. Do not receive an accusation, Timothy, against an elder, except at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. And then he goes on, those that sin rebuke before all. But it puts me in mind a few years ago, there was a brother that attended, and I'm always concerned somebody doesn't know us that well, we don't know them that well, and wants to place membership. We want people to place membership, but I like for them to take enough time for us to mutually get to know each other. But anyway, he wanted to talk to the elders, and he wanted to talk about placing membership, and he liked to talk, by the way. And one of the first things he said, we have 3 elders, At that time, we had 4 elders. And he was saying, I wanted you to know why I was leaving the congregation where I was, and he started saying something about one of the elders there. I said, hold on just a minute. I said, have you talked to him about this? But I don't even know, what the complaint was. We didn't get that far. I said, hold up. Have you talked to him about this? Well, no, but, and going to continue. I said, no, that's something you need to talk to him about. And I said, here's the thing. It would be wrong for you to, whatever it was, it's going to be wrong for you to say it, and it's going to be wrong for us to listen to it. Because the text says, against an elder, receive not an accusation except at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. You're just one. And by your own admission, you've not even talked to him about this. Well, and what I was not saying is, we don't want you to attend here, because we did. I wasn't saying we don't want you to place membership. But to go in on those kind of terms, we were not going to listen to talk about an elder from one source, and especially if you've not tried to resolve that and work that out with the problem you have something against, or he has something against you, whatever the case might be. God hates a false witness who utters lies. Finally, he hates one who sows discord among brethren. It's interesting to me, and again, these are 7 things. It's not the only 7 things that God hates, but out of those 7, do you notice that 3 of those involve the mouth? 3 of those involve our lips, our tongue. And I'm including this as number 3. You have the lying tongue, you have the false witness who utters lies, but I've tried to think about one who sows discord among brethren. How are you going to do that except by talking? Sowing discord. Now, I realize that, you could say, well, he didn't say it, he just typed it and put it on Facebook. But it's still communication. In other words, really, from the perspective, I believe, of this passage, it turns out that 3 of the 7 have to do with the improper use of the tongue, and God hates that. God hates those who sow discord among brethren. I just mentioned, if you have aught against a brother, go show him his fault between you and... The Bible tells us when something comes up, how to handle that. But sowing discord is not the way. Getting on Facebook is not the way. Talking to everybody else except the one you have a problem with is not the way, and God hates those who sow discord among brethren. In Psalm 133 and verse 1, behold how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And that is true, isn't it? Blessed be the tie that binds. And for a congregation to truly be at peace, and where people love one another and mutually support one another, that is a wonderful thing. And that's what God wants. He wants people to feel good when they come to services from the standpoint, I'm not talking about it's about how you feel. I'm just saying for you to be edified, for you to know you're doing the right thing and feel good in that sense, that you've glorified God. And so this is something you look forward to. He doesn't want you to dread coming to services because there are brethren there that won't speak to each other and you're wondering if they'll speak to you or what's going to happen. And just as soon as it's over, you're going to get out of there as quick as you can. God doesn't want that. He doesn't want discord. He wants us to be at peace. And there are ways that people can do that, and it might not seem all that terrible, but maybe a brother's name is mentioned, and maybe you don't say anything, you just kind of roll your eyes. That body language. Or something said, just making those little digs there, because, I didn't mean anything by that. But planting those kind of seeds that are really sowing discord. We don't want to do that. You remember what Jesus said in John chapter 13? In John chapter 13, Jesus said on the night of his betrayal, I'm looking at John chapter 13 and verse 34, 35, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. Now verse 35 says, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. And I thought about the power of that statement. Because if Brother Brown were to preach a lesson, and I'm sure he has, on how to identify the New Testament church, and we did some of that earlier this week, there are many features where you could say, here is what distinguishes the New Testament church. Here's what distinguishes Christians. But the thing about it is, what Jesus does not say is, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, because on the first day of each week you eat unleavened bread. Now, I've already said earlier this week, that was central to the church coming together. We said that Sunday, didn't we? That's central to the church coming together to break bread. But that's not what Jesus said would be the way that all men know you're my disciples. We sing, we've talked about that earlier we sing unaccompanied by instrumental music, and we defended that from the Scripture, but Jesus did not say, by this shall all men know you're my disciples, if you sing spiritual songs without the instrument. That's how they'll know. And you could go through any number of things that are important. It's truth, and it must be done, and we're not taking away from that. But here's what Jesus said. By this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. And not just any love. What made it a new commandment is, as I have loved you, that you love one another. The church father Tertullian, in his work, I think the name of it is Against Heresies, he was defending what he understood Christians to be in a pagan world, but he's talking about how that the pagans would say of Christians, behold how they love one another. I'm not sure that's what always is being said. You know, when there's rift, when there's discord, the community knows that, and word gets out. And it kills your outreach, it kills your evangelism. And so it is so important. Never, ever be a part of sowing discord. Don't be on the giving end, don't be on the receiving end, don't have anything to do with that. God hates those who sow discord. We want to do all things for edification. We want to build up and not tear down. We don't want to operate a wrecking crew. We're in the construction business. And so we don't want to have any part of that at all. Well, you've listened patiently tonight. I'd like to close with Hebrews chapter 12 and read verse 28 and verse 29, and then the lesson is yours. Hebrews 12 and verse 28. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably with reverence and fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Brethren, it's time for us to hate that which God hates, and to rejoice in all the blessings that we have. But any time we're minimizing sin or being any part of that, we're acting contrary to the will of God. We're a holy people. We're a holy nation. We're a royal priesthood. We're a kingdom of priests. And we don't have any business taking part in any of these things that God hates. Tonight, if you're present as one who's not yet obeyed the gospel, the invitation song has been selected. If you need to be restored to the Lord, I don't know that there might be someone with that need. Let us know, please, as together we stand and sing.
When Jesus comes to